So now things are getting really exciting. We are heading towards the start line. Let's have a look into the most popular questions as they relate to racing for our runners. And the first one's a really nice place to start. And what we'd love to know is Steve's racing experience. So when was your first marathon and how did it go and what did you learn?
Well, that's a great story. And don't take this as probably the textbook way to do it, but I got selected to run the 10K at the Commonwealth Games in Edinburgh in 1986. And a few months out, my coach suggested I might run the marathon as well, and which I did. And so 6 days after finishing fifth in the 10K, I ran the marathon and won a bronze medal. Pretty good outcome, really. Wasn't that hard. And all I'd done in training is I'd added 14 minutes. I used to run 7-minute miles, if people can relate to mileage. And I used to do 18 miles on a Sunday morning, which was 2 hours and 6 minutes. And I bumped it out to 20 miles. So again, that 34, 35K that I did at the end of my career, I was heading out to that. So at 20 miles, 32K, I added that 14 minutes onto the back end of my long run. Again, stressing the importance of the long run. And it served me pretty well. I ran 2:11:18 or something in my first ever marathon. So it was a pretty good debut. And I remember going over on the plane, a 10K track runner. I got on the plane on the way home. I was a marathon runner. So it started pretty well.
What an incredible turn of events, and difficult to manage future expectations when you're starting off so strongly with medals, but that's an incredible performance. We've got a great little question here around nutrition. Again, we really realise this is such a personal topic, but what our runners put in here for race is that their gut responds well to liquid nutrition, but to get the recommended cups of course nutrition in, or 240 calories per hour, they would need to take 1 to 2 cups at alternate refreshment stations, which could be a little bit awkward. Would they be better taking 1 cup for each refreshment or supplementing with a gel? It'd be interesting just to hear your approach on that. And we've certainly got some guidelines. Over to you, Steve. Thank you.
Yeah, nutrition, not my strong point. I used to just train really hard, and I think being fit helped me. I had the 8 drink stations, so we didn't have gels. I'm talking real old school. So I had sports drinks. So at 8 drink stations, every 5K, we would have a drink station. I had about 200 mils in a sauce bottle or drink bottle, and I'd run along and get as much down as I could just to top up those electrolytes and get a bit of fluid on board. So that worked well for me. General runners may not have access to those elite drinking stations. There may only be water, or there might be a sports drink that you haven't used before. So having your own gel and having practiced it in training is really important, and it gives you the flexibility to have it whenever you want. But I use the guide. If you've got 2 or 3 gels with you, then a drink station is probably a reminder to get them on board. You want to have it probably 1 drink station earlier than when you need it, because you're better getting it on board before you need it. So 10K, 20K, 30K, maybe 1 in your back pocket. If you're really getting tired at 37, 38, might just get you over the line. But it gives you the flexibility. If you're carrying the gels with you, you can have them whenever you want. And if you've got too many, it's better to have too many than not enough. So why wouldn't you use that nutrition if you got the opportunity? I never did have that opportunity, and so I just used the drink stations. But if you got the opportunity to do it, why wouldn't you? And I would be trying to have that. As a reminder, normally you have your gel first. So as you're coming up, you're approaching the drink station, have your gel first and then grab a water to wash it down. And if you did that every second drink station, I think you'd be served pretty well.
That's really helpful, and great to hear your experience on that as well. We've certainly got some very clear guidelines on this in our last webinar around nutrition, but the key thing that we've obviously heard Steve and our nutritionists say is you've got to not come into the race and try anything new, especially with nutrition. And with your longer runs, there's some really clear opportunities that you can actually practice this to make sure that you're not going to make any critical errors on the nutrition front on race day. Now, pacing has been a huge topic, and we get a lot of questions here, and I think this is a cracker. It's a very short question. But in terms of best times or performances, what do you reckon, Steve? Even pace or negative splits? And we might need to just explain some negative splits and what they might mean for the audience there as well.
For me, it was always even pace. In fact, I used to allow for 2 minutes at the back end. So if I went through halfway in a marathon in 65 minutes, then I would be thinking, well, I'm probably on track to run about 2:12. So that 2 minutes was my buffer. Now, obviously, if you're a 4-hour marathon runner, it's not going to be 2 minutes. It might be 5 minutes at the back end. So I always like to go through a little bit quicker through the first half. So in my world, that would be positive splitting 2 minutes. Now, there was sort of a time through the end of the 90s and the early noughties where people were negative splitting in marathons, where they'd have paces and they'd go out at a set pace, and then they would run the second half of the race. Once the paces dropped out, they'd actually get going and run the second half quicker. So there was a bit of a school of thought that your best run was to negative split, but I think it'd be fair to say that generally across the board, most people allow for even splits and just to slow down a little bit in that back half. It's really difficult to hold even splits all the way across a marathon. But I think it's the best way to spread out your energy stores. So you talk about your nutrition, your training. That's the most efficient way to do it. I remember at the Commonwealth Games in 1990, one of the runners in the race took off after about 5K and they sprinted down the road. And we all just looked at each other and had a laugh because we knew that sprinting was going to use energy so much quicker, and that energy was going to be energy you'd be wanting to save for the back end of the race. And sure enough, 15K down the road, he was on the side of the road and we cruised past and had a really strong run to the finish. So setting an even pace where you're making sure you're not wasting energy by doing these spurts along the way is the best way to run a marathon.
Outstanding. And this leads into our last race question here really, really well. And I think there are also some pitfalls in this, but should you chase a time? And I think what the question means is, should you chase a time in terms of how well you're feeling on the day, or should you stick to the plan?
I had a race a few weeks ago and I was actually feeling pretty good, and I hadn't done the distance. It was 23K and I hadn't ran that far in training regularly in the lead up, and I sort of had a plan and I wanted to go a bit earlier, but I just stuck to it. And I had a group I was running with. I said, no, look, run with these guys till 10, run till 11, because at 11, you've got 10K to go to the marathon. I said, run to 13, because then it's 23K this race. So stick with them for 13. Then I've got 10K at the back end. As it turns out, I ran with them till about 16K. I knew I only had 5K then to get through the half marathon distance. And I actually benefited from that. I ran home really strongly. So the last couple of K, I was running quicker. So for me, having a plan leading in, it really made me stick to that group rather than, I know I was really tempted to go harder, and I'm sure I would have got tired at the back end and I wouldn't have had such a positive outcome. So really sticking to the plan. I had that message in my head. It was like someone was sitting on my shoulder saying, no, come on, be patient. You'll benefit from this. You know you're going to need this in the last few K. So just spread out and stick to the plan, back yourself in, and you'll be fine. So for me, it was really being strong enough, knowing in the lead up that I'd done this amount of training and being realistic the night before, just making sure I kept reinforcing mentally in my mind that I was going to stick to this race plan and just execute as best I possibly could on the day.